His father was very rough. And it's no accident that Lincoln took as his first jobs off the farm, being a merchant, transporting materials. Would be like the modern day equivalent of being a trucker, down the Mississippi River. Lincoln was always looking for ways to get off that farm and to make money in another way. And he eventually goes into politics, as you know. He eventually becomes a lawyer, does anything to escape being a farmer. And what he saw is the emotional poverty of his dad. His dad's criticism that he wanted to read, and he'd be beaten when he'd be caught reading, if his dad had chores for him to do. Tough life. He didn't even go to his dad's funeral when his dad died around 1850. Lincoln pretty much had cut that relationship off. He had the ability to walk away from somebody who had done that much harm to him. Lincoln was prone to depression. The most serious bout of depression that was observed was when the love of his life died. That's a young man, this guy about your age at this point, in New Salem, Illinois, and he falls in love. We know from the accounts of Joshua Speed and others who observed him at this time, and also from a poem that Lincoln published in the local newspaper after Anne Rutledge dies. He truly is smitten with her, and they're good friends. She can talk politics. She's smart. They have a great relationship. And she also then dies one of these terrible deaths that sweeps the frontier. I don't know if it was cholera or typhoid or what it was, but she also dies an agonizing death. Before she dies, he makes one last visit to her home, and the door's closed. No one knows what was said. But he came out utterly, absolutely devastated from that meeting with Anne Rutledge. And he was never able to get over her. Historians suspect that he thought about Anne every day the rest of his life until he was assassinated on April 14th, 1865. So probably for the next 30 years, there was a part of him that always remained with Anne. He was so depressed after Anne's death. He was so depressed that he could not stand the thought of rain and snow coming down on Anne's grave. He was devastated by this. And you know what he did? The rain came and he literally threw himself on her grave. He was that depressed. Think of that. How many people do you know grieve openly like that? And this was just a very unself-conscious guy on the frontier. So we know he suffered major bouts of depression. Historians think there were 6 major depressive episodes that were so severe that his friends had to take all the knives away from him so that he would not commit suicide. That's how depressed he was. Now, he wasn't a guy who kept guns. He was, as I say, Abraham Lincoln was a little bit different as a person. As a kid, one of the reasons his dad criticized him so much is that he shot 2 turkeys when he was 7 years old. And he felt sorry for the turkeys. He felt really bad that these beautiful birds had been killed. He presumably enjoyed eating the turkeys, but he didn't want to do the shooting. He knew that there were plenty of people all around him who enjoyed that kind of thing. Great. Let them be the hunters. He'd be the lawyer. He'd be the politician leader. So Lincoln had a great deal of emotional poverty to overcome, which is one of the things that makes him such a compelling figure. When people... It was Booker T. Washington who said that it's one thing to say, okay, a person is great just by the absolute position they attain. But if they come from a very moneyed background, they're coming from Phillips Academy, they're coming from political connections, father is probably already a senator, say, the climb to the top, while tough and while we admire it, is not the same, is it, as the person who comes from a dirt floor log cabin poorer than dirt, in the Indiana frontier, abandoned by civilization practically. And you look at a guy like that that goes all the way to the top, and you have to say there is something special inside that person. You add to that things, unspeakable things that we wouldn't know. A father that beats you, a mother who dies an agonizing death while you're stuck in a 14 by 12 foot cabin and watching it, a sister who dies in childbirth, the love of your life who dies, all by the time you're in your mid-20s, a terrible marriage. His marriage, in a lot of ways, to Mary Todd was a very difficult marriage. There are many strong aspects. They loved their kids, their 4 kids. But you know how many of his kids died? I mean, of the 4 kids, 3 of them really didn't reach adulthood. 1 of them died in the White House. This was a man who knew grief and suffering again and again and again. So it's one thing, you know, to start out up here and go up here. It's another thing to start out down there and go up here. And that takes incredible inner strength and character to overcome that emotional poverty. Emotional poverty. Much worse than material poverty. A 5th thing that you would see about a great leader, I think, is the ability to communicate effectively. Okay, we've already established they're a people person. They know how to relate to people. They want to connect. They want people to connect with them. They'll look them in the eye and they'll connect right with them. They want to convey their passion. They feel passion. They want to share their imagination, their vision for how to make something better. They have that strength of character. We talked a little bit about the trust. We talked about overcoming the emotional poverty. They have all of those qualities. But they have to have the ability to communicate what they care about. Abraham Lincoln arguably is the greatest statesman in our history because of his ability to communicate his vision to the country. It starts early on. If you go back already to some of his speeches to the Lyceum, for example, in the 1830s, you already see that he has a vision of what the founders were about and what the country needs to be better than the founding generation. He thought that we were in decline. So communication was very important to him. Now here's a guy, again, 1 year of formal schooling. Here's a guy who has just incredible educational capacity because he read deeply in Shakespeare, he read Byron's poetry, he read Burns's poetry, he read Aesop's fables, he read the Old Testament, he read the New Testament. If you read his second inaugural address, you see 4 biblical references, for example. Here's a man who, when he was in the White House, there was no West Wing in those days, but between appointments, here was a guy who he would have a little pocket edition of Shakespeare, and he would take it out and he would read, and he was constantly thinking. And that whole house divided passage from the book of Matthew meant so much to him that already in his Kalamazoo speech, in his one great speech in Michigan, he's already talking about how the United States ultimately cannot be a house divided, half slave, half free. Of course, that's the biblical allusion that he's using. He knew his audience read the Bible. He knew what phrases would resonate. And he was somebody who, he did not write the Gettysburg Address on the back of an envelope. That's myth. Here's somebody who thought long and hard about the message that he wanted to convey, because he cared about people. If you care about people and you're trying to connect with them, you're not just getting up there and winging it. You're trying really hard to craft a message that will help them, that they can respond to, that they can use in their lives. So Abraham Lincoln was really maybe in some ways the beginnings of our rhetorical presidency, of putting emphasis on great speechifying as a way, not of aggrandizing your ego, not as a way of saying, hey, look at me, aren't I a great entertainer? I have the highest ratings, Nielsen ratings. No. But as a way of furthering the cause that you believe in.